Welcome, everybody, to the Reach Your Ultimate Potential podcast. As a reminder, this podcast is designed for the HR professional. Okay. There are so many things out there that help the HR professional help their employees or help their company. But how often is there something for the HR professional themselves? You have so much to deal with, so many people to help. But at the end of the day, who takes care of HR? Especially as you are trying to reach your ultimate potential. And so in this podcast, I bring guests who can speak to that, who have their own experience taking care of their own well-being, but also some words of advice on how to help you as an HR professional. And today it's my pleasure to introduce Cassandra Rose. She and I just met recently, but in the short time that we had together, I felt of her presence. She definitely has that presence where she just commands the room and she's fun to listen to. So I'm excited to have her on the show today. Cassandra, welcome.
Thank you, Ben. That was very complimentary.
And Cassandra, how we generally start these episodes is if you could tell us a bit about yourself, both about yourself and your work history so we can get to know you a little bit.
Sure. Well, I am a mom of two. I have a fur baby who came first. Her name is Lola, and a son who is 4 going on 40. So more to come on that. I'm also a wife, a sister, and just, a committed citizen just trying to do better in the world. Professionally, I am a partner at Meritarc. I founded our DEI practice where we work with organizations committed to DEI to provide solutions so they can attract and captivate top talent.
Awesome. It's neat hearing both sides of that introduction, but how uncommon, I would say, it is to just hear about the person, right? I mean, when you're talking about fur baby and your family, it's like, oh, wow, I felt a real connection. And so in our world of HR, we often hear of the resume, right? And this title here, this time here. And yes, that's part of us. But I think it's another reminder of how important it is to get to know people as human beings. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you, Ben, for allowing me to share.
No problem. So Cassandra, in your experience, and especially in these last 2 years, just tell us about how your well-being has been affected by everything that has gone on these last 2 years.
Well, I usually like to start my calls by telling people that I'm going to create a petition to Ricky Martin to bring back the song Livin' La Vida Loca 2022 style, because right. I feel like he was ahead of his time. In terms of that song. I mean, there's so many ups and downs to our years and sometimes even in the day. One of the things that I think through a lot is how much I'm letting in, because you can experience compassion fatigue. And I think as a mom, as a wife, as an HR professional, my go-to is to always just charge through and figure out a solution. And it's not until I feel like really burned out or just like really passive that I start to realize I'm not pouring enough into myself. So these last 2 years going into year 3 of a global pandemic has been a challenge in ways that no one could have foreseen. But for me personally, has been a way for me to recontract what boundaries are, what they look like, and really allowing myself the space to say no and not feel guilty. So I think that's really been my journey.
Mm-hmm. Goodness, Kay, what I love doing about these or in these conversations is to just break it apart, kind of like a coach does. But you share so much. It's like, man, how can I keep up? So many good things is what I mean. And so I just want to point out a couple things real quick. First, you talked about just rushing through and getting to the solution kind of thing. And then I want to go back to the word recontract, which I loved. So help me remember that.
Okay.
But the rushing through to find the solution, right? I mean, it's so common for us as HR professionals to be here and we say, okay, I love helping people. I have that talent and I want to do it. And so, yeah, when people come to me with their issues, I love helping them and solve their problems or make their experience more enjoyable at work. That's great. But to your point, if we do that all the time and we don't take breaks and we're just so busy and that's all we think about, then yes, we can run into what you called compassion fatigue. And so it's something that, as you were talking about, it's something I realized about myself, even now, having been an entrepreneur for the last 2 years, after leaving that executive HR position, I find myself sometimes going back to the old way of doing things and just saying, I have to show up for others to solve their problems. And then, oh no, I'm starting to feel burned out and the compassion fatigue. So I have to give myself permission to have those boundaries, like you said.
100%, Ben. And I like to think of what you do for money as something that's organic to you, and then you fit it into the profession. So I think givers tend to be attracted to HR functions because we love serving, we love advocacy, we love those things about the job. And so it's hard for us to take out who we are from what we do. And
Mm,
and we think if we're not doing it that way with that intensity, are we dedicated? Are we passionate? That's where I think the problem really centers. And one of the things that I remind myself, and again, I try to bring levity to everything, is that I have the same 24 hours as Beyonce. I just don't have her team, right? So even if I worked the 24 hours, 7 days a week, I would still be behind. There would still be an email I didn't get to or an issue I didn't resolve, right? So me being more burned out doesn't make me a better professional, doesn't make me a better mom, doesn't make me a better friend. So being able to learn to just prioritize the fires, let's be honest, and then say, I'm going to take a step back so I can refill, so I can recharge and come back afresh and anew is the better way to support the people that are depending on me.
hmm And a personal thing, if I may. So us, you and me, right before this, I mentioned to you, I've had a day of back-to-back meetings, and to be honest, I wasn't mentally ready for this, even though it was planned. But I felt comfortable bringing it up with you and just saying, hey, I just need a moment to reset and take a deep breath. And you gave me that permission. And I always felt safe to do so. And I feel like that's an important thing for HR professionals to give themselves permission to do, even if it's a 5 to 10 second thing. But that
Mm-hmm.
deep breath and that permission to do something can make all the difference.
Ben, you're taking it actually to a whole different level, because even with professional sports, a lot of athletes, they might do what seems to you as like a throwaway movement or gesture, but that's how they take breaks. Like I know with Serena Williams, when she's, going at a tennis ball at 100 miles an hour, she'll actually like touch her racket. Like that's her quick reset in her moment. So if people at the top of their fields are giving themselves space within the moment, right, of still performing and still doing a good job, who are we, mere mortals, to not do the same?
There you go. So back to the idea of recontract with yourself.
Mm,
I love that
hmm.
idea because as HR professionals, we can understand, right? The employment contract and say, this is what I expect of you, and this is what we're going to give to you. I think we should do the same thing with ourselves. And if we need to make it in that analogous formal way to say, I have a contract with myself, then do it and say, hey, at noon, I am going to take my lunch because that's important for my well-being or whatever it
Hmm.
happens to be, right?
100%. And I would actually add to that and then respect that boundary for yourself. The same way that you would advise someone else, like a manager, to do that for their team, coach yourself to do the same thing. So if you go ahead and put that time on the calendar, don't just say, I can move it by 5 minutes. I can move it by 15 minutes. Actually, let me repurpose this to catch up on that email. Walk away if you have to, literally walk away from your desk. I can't tell you how many lunch breaks I've had with a sandwich in one hand and still typing on the keyboard. And there's going to be moments for that, but that shouldn't be your normal. And it's so easy for us to put ourselves second place because our nature is to serve, our nature is to give. And I would say, really, truly assign yourself that same coaching, assign yourself that same level of importance, and respect the time that you put for yourself.
Mm-hmm. I just love what you're saying. And what comes to my mind is sometimes if we're so ingrained in the habit of skipping the lunch or not honoring our boundaries or not honoring that contract, then yeah, a coach or an accountability partner or somebody that
Mm-hmm.
you team up with can help you with that, right? Even if it's just a friend in some other company, an HR friend or something, right? And just say, hey, here's what I'm going to do. And I'd love it for you to hold me accountable. Make sure I take my lunch breaks or make sure I
Yeah.
do my little meditations in the morning and I can help.
Yeah, I love that. And put people in it, right? So if it's maybe your spouse, because my spouse also happens to work from the home, and it's as though we live in two different houses. He goes into his war room, which is a home office that was repurposed. My son's nursery is actually now my home office, and we just see each other like passing shifts. So sometimes it's like, hey, on Friday, why don't we actually just sit in the kitchen together
Mm-hmm.
and eat for half an hour, and just if even if it's just that one day. But then it's something to look forward to. It's something that has a commitment with another person, so I'm less likely to cancel it. So try to find fun and inventive ways to invite the people in your life that you love into that process with you too.
Ooh, I love that. And what you reminded me of is where you mentioned sometimes it's hard for us to separate who we are with what we do.
Hmm.
And I find that so common, especially as HR professionals. And then what you just mentioned about your personal experience of same house, different world, and that Friday afternoon where you see each other and you remind each other, even if it's subliminally, hey, we're still people, right? We're not just
Hmm.
the problem solver, not just the title, not just the if I don't do this, I'm not going to make money kind of thing. And I think that's huge for HR professionals because we almost always live in such an external manner. I'm solving that problem. I'm feeling this person's cares. I don't, I'm trying to solve this, whatever. I need that time to remind myself I'm still me outside of all of this, right?
Right. And that doesn't validate my existence either, right? My ability to solve doesn't make me a better human. I
Mhm.
am a good human. And that's what I also would invite people to really explore. Because that's where it came from. It wasn't this like need to be super ambitious. I am an ambitious woman, but it wasn't necessarily I need the title. I was joking with someone the other day that, HR professionals don't do it for the money. This is not one of those professions. They're like, you know what? You can care about people, but the money makes it worth it. We know that we're coming to the table because we truly want to affect change. And so you can still do that and take lunch. You can still do that and make your kids soccer practice or go for a quick walk and listen to a meditation, and just reminding ourselves that our worth isn't just in our ability to get to our inbox to zero.
Mm.
Your worth is who you are and what you bring. And thank goodness you brought it to that organization.
Oh, goodness, Kay, this is such a good topic. And I think it's a deep one. So we're just going to brush it
Okay.
because we won't be able to go super deep into it. But I, when you and I first met 1 or 2 weeks ago, and you had talked about belonging, I think
Mm,
this is a good segue into that. And I just want to listen to you talk for a little bit. I may interrupt with questions. That's what I do. But but I'd love to hear your knowledge on it and your expertise, because we've talked about worth. We've talked about separating identity from who we are and what we do. But just tell me what you see, what you teach, and what you know about the idea of belonging, especially as an HR professional.
yeah, sure. Let me just pull out my PhD. No problem, and just boilerplate. But all kidding aside, belonging to me is an effect. It is what happens when everything else works. So when we think about, and I know there's a lot of acronyms out there: diversity, equity, inclusion, diversity, inclusion. My favorite right now is JEDI, which is justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. I'm like, I want to be a Jedi because I'm a bit of a Star Wars nerd. Um, I think about diversity as just being able to bring people with differences together. We don't necessarily need to mark those differences because they're different per geographic region, or even time, right? Just thinking about what we would consider in one category of community today may be different than 100 years from now was different 100 years ago. When I think about equity, I really focus in on making sure people understand the distinction between that and equality. Equality truly is saying, hey, everyone has a fair playground, right? To come in and do as they wish. And in an ideal world, that's true. But we know that there are certain systems that create barriers that don't allow that to actually exercise and become active. So equity is just making sure that we're shoring up those systems, or sometimes breaking down the system completely, to ensure that people have a better advantage and a more equal way of getting to that outcome. When I think of inclusion, that has to be intentional. It can't be by happenstance. When you're including someone, if you think about a birthday party, right? You can't be like, oh, my birthday party is coming up. I'm not going to tell anybody where it is, what time it is, on what date I'm doing it, but I want them to celebrate me. You include those people by inviting them to that party. So inclusion has to be intentional. When you have different people coming together and you're creating spaces so that way everyone can be able to attend the party, guess what? People feel like they belong. So I think if you start with belonging, you're starting with what the outcome should be. And even in math, you can't do that. You can't just be like 21. What is that solving? You have to, what is the problem? How do we do the work to get there? And then the outcome should appear.
Very cool. Two questions come to my mind. In the example of the birthday party, right? When you do invite everybody, so everybody does feel the option to attend, is there anything else that needs to be done once everybody is at the party to help them belong?
Yeah, I think that's where the E comes in for equity for me. Let's say you had a friend who was in a wheelchair and they were having a problem getting into the building. What if your party was on the second floor? You wouldn't be like, oh, well, that's just tough. Everybody else was able to get there. You would never do that. You would say, is there an elevator? Is there a way that someone can help them out of the wheelchair and we can pick up the wheelchair, right? That's the equity part, because you really want them to be at the table. So you need to consider their specific needs. You're not making them more privileged. You're really just trying to get them to the same outcome that everybody else who probably didn't have the challenge of getting their wheelchair into the building, who was able-bodied and could walk. So I think when you're thinking through that invitation, you have to take into account who you've invited and what they may need to be able to have the best experience at the party.
Right. And so let's bring it back to the HR professional, right? And I'm just going to remember my own world where you are often the person tasked with handing out the invitations to somebody else's party, right? And so you were kind of in charge, you know all the details, you even know everybody's names, but you're HR. And we don't talk around HR, you know, oh, HR's coming, we better change our jokes, right? And then that makes it feel like, oh darn, well, how do I belong? I mean, I want to have these conversations, but can I even sit at their table? Will they allow me to sit at their table? Or how does an HR professional belong in an environment like this?
Ben, you hit a specific nerve for me, because I've been that person. If anything, I've proactively done it. And I think maybe I've isolated myself from employee populations because I didn't want them to do it first. I'm like, oh no, I'm HR. I don't go to those things, right? And it almost creates this like, oh, you're better than us. And it's like, no, I just know that there are certain ways that I have to show the title and represent in that way, right? So I think there's two things that I've done. I'm not saying these are the best ideas, but these are what I've done to navigate those spaces. One is to find community amongst other HR people. And so I've been in workspaces where I was the only one, the only woman, the only Black woman, the only person in HR. I know how tough that can be. And so if there's a local chapter or a LinkedIn group, join that and become active, because there's a ton of other army of one HR people who you can find collaboration in. Sometimes we think that at home, you know, in our organizations is where we need to find that belonging. And maybe that's not possible just based on the arrangement. So try to find that for yourself. Two is to also make sure that you're focusing on your shared humanity. Yes, you have to represent, and if you see something, say something. I agree with that. But there's always another opportunity to be able to build trust with your people. And when I say your people, I mean your employees. And I think it's, you know, if someone's having a birthday party or if someone's having a baby, maybe not necessarily having to lead that charge, but showing up and being yourself, like have fun. And when people joke about HR and you be like, oh, where? Right? People want to know that if I make that joke, how are you going to take it? Sometimes that's their test. And if you feel comfortable enough, show your personality. Everyone knows that that must be a tough job. I don't think anyone's going at it like we want to make this person feel ostracized. So kind of take it on the chin that first time, as long as it's in, you know, playful jest, and show them who you are. And I think slowly but surely, that's how you can build some of that rapport.
I love those examples. Let's see. So this was, let's say it's mind-blowing. Okay. I don't want to exaggerate, but my goodness, it was for me. When I was executive HR, And in my mind, I'm here to help employees love their job. I'm here to help corporate get their, messaging across so we can all work together to have a successful company. And so I saw myself as somebody who is helping everybody else.
Mhm.
But then my coworkers on the executive team, they reminded me that a lot of people see me as the bad guy. And it's not me, it's HR,
Right.
right? And it's, oh, HR has to fire, HR has to enforce policies, HR has to do this. And yeah, that's part of the job. And so I was thinking about it. I was like, oh my goodness, I would imagine that police officers, for example, might feel the same. Their
Mhm.
job is to go around and make sure people feel safe in the city. And it's a great place for people to visit and live in. But how many people look at a cop car and think, oh yeah, that's great, as opposed to, oh, I check my speed, make sure I'm not speeding, or
Mhm.
start to just feel a little guilty, right? And I found that so interesting because I had, I guess, stopped thinking that way forever because I was just so focused on, well, I'm here to help, and then I forgot how people saw me. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. I've actually done a lot of studies on the genesis of HR, right? Because HR was first really administrative. That's what it was. It was brought in response to unionizing efforts to be like, hey, we have this human being who's going to actually make sure you get your money. Go to that person. And it was
Mm,
supposed to only be that. HR being a strategic partner, that's relatively new to an industrialized workforce. We're talking about 70s, 80s where those inklings started, and really not until I would say the .com boom and bust and really going into early 2000s did people say, oh, wait, there's this thing called culture. People would shockingly leave even if you throw money at them if you don't have a place where they feel like they can develop, that they feel like they can be mentored, that they feel that they can grow and have opportunity. It's not just about money.
mm,
And the companies who really leaned into that concept are doing extraordinarily well. And everyone else is either trying to catch up or create that from the beginning, especially in the startup world. So I think that reputation of HR being the bad guy or not trustworthy sometimes was well earned, because at the end of the day, who are we being paid by,
mhm.
right? And so I think when you're having massive layoffs and where you're disrupting people's lives, why would they trust you? And so the approach that I take whenever I'm going into a new organization and having to rebuild my reputation with new people is to really think, how can I create as much trust as possible as fast as possible? And a lot of it comes down to listening and meeting their needs. And when I mean by listening, I'm not just saying do whatever they say to do, whether it be my manager or the employee, is truly trying to figure out what is the outcome that they're expecting. So, a quick example I could give is when I was in charge of global benefits, and I would do all this work and analytics and work with my brokers to come up with like the best benefits package at the best price that I possibly could negotiate. And someone would be like, but you forgot about pet insurance. Like, I have a dog. Don't you care about my dog? Right? It's very easy to be like, are you kidding? I've just spent months negotiating with health insurance providers and trying to get your in-network benefits to stay at the same copay. And after all of that work, you're saying I missed pet insurance, which you can get on your own. That's an easy reaction. And you can see how detailed I am. Maybe that was my first reaction. And then I go, wait a minute, what is this person saying to me? Maybe they're not even on the health insurance plan. Maybe they're still on their parents. Maybe even they're on a spouse. So that work doesn't actually support their need. But the need that they have is their pet. And you're right, I didn't take that into account when I was making all my tabulations in the back end. So instead of feeling slighted, instead of saying that, this employee just doesn't truly understand my work, I invite them into the conversation and say, okay, what would that look like? Do you know other people who'd be interested in that? That may be something I can do next year. Now that person has built trust because they're like, they heard me. They took the time to actually better understand what I'm asking. And honestly, if I could Google it and find something for them to just supply that need for right now, I'll do that. I'll take that extra step because now I have someone who can be a champion and say, hey, the next time I need something, even if it's a little, I'm not so sure I can come to HR, Cassandra will listen to me.
Mhm.
And that makes me feel better.
Great example. Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
Okay, so Like I said, we could only brush this, right? So let me say one more thing, and then let's hear how people can reach out to you if they'd like to continue this conversation, right? And so this principle of being in HR, whether you're in HR of one, which is a very common thing,
Mhm.
or an HR of many, this can still happen where we feel like we don't belong, we feel the loneliness, we feel like we have to solve all the problems, but we're struggling at it. We feel like we can't tell anybody because it's confidential or nobody will understand or nobody has the time. All those thoughts that go through our head. So the community aspect is so important. Just hearing somebody like Cassandra, where she can talk about a situation from a removed point of view, right? That gives us the ability to think through something rationally and bounce an idea off of somebody. And that takes us out of our emotional spin, things that I talk
Mhm.
about, because in the emotional spin, the brain is being overwhelmed. And that if we stay in that, then we continuously feel more and more victimized. And I can't solve my problem. And I'm just here until something happens to get better. But that doesn't often happen. And so the idea of reaching out to the community, hiring a coach, talking to somebody can be huge in your well-being and feeling like you belong. So Cassandra, if somebody does want to reach out to you, how can they do so?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and I honestly try to respond to every single message that I'm sent. And I extend the invitation to your audience if anyone has a question, specifically benefits related, because that's my wheelhouse. I love benefits advocacy. Feel free to reach out to me and connect on LinkedIn. I also do have an Instagram account, Miss Cassandra Rose. So it's my name with the letters M and S in front of it, where I give out weekly benefits and diversity, equity, inclusion tips.
Perfect. Is there anything else that you'd like to say regarding our conversation today? Any last tidbit you want to give?
Well, one thing I want to give you credit, Ben, because you're doing amazing work. Very rarely do people truly focus on the giver, and you're taking intentional time to do that. So thank you for the work that you're doing for the HR professionals. I hope your message just spread loud and wide. And I would just say the last tidbit is just, again, you're a giver. If you're listening to this, you are taking the time to develop yourself. Don't forget to also include that self-care, because you are better for it and better to your people. So it's just a virtuous cycle of good.
Thank you so much. That's great advice. And to the listener, as a reminder, you can hear more resources like this, as well as speakers like Cassandra, in the LinkedIn group called HR Wellbeing. So it's a free group. You're welcome to go join there, and we hope to see you there. So thank you again for listening to this episode.